session will be moderated by Professor Olushola Bandele Oyewole. He is the Secretary General of the AAU. He's a former Vice-Chancellor of the Federal University of Agriculture, Abeokuta, Nigeria. He's a Professor of Food Science and Technology, former President of the AAU, and former staff of both the AAU and the African Union Commission. As expected, he is highly published in peer-reviewed journals and other areas. He holds a Bachelor of Science from Obafemi Awolowo University, a Master of Science from the University of Ibadan, and a PhD in Food Science and Technology, also from the University of Ibadan. Our speaker today will be Professor John Uma Mugabe. He is a Professor of Science and Technology, Science and Innovation Policy at the University of Pretoria. He is a Senior Consultant with the African Development Bank. He is a Senior Associate Fellow at the Science Policy Research Unit at the University of Sussex, UK, and an Associate at the Council on Health Research for Development in Geneva. He is the former Executive Director of the African Center for Technology Studies in Nairobi, and former Director of the Office of Science and Technology of the New Partnership for Africa's Development in South Africa. He holds a PhD in Political Science, Political Economy from the University of Amsterdam. He is a Fellow of the World Academy of Arts and Science. He is a member of the Global Technology Assessment Network. He has consulted widely in the areas of science, technology, and innovation policy. He has also published widely in the areas of science, technology, innovation, and public policy. He is interested in the research areas of political economy, of science, technology, and innovation policy making. We have two speakers. The second speaker is Dr. Angeline Wairegi. She is a research manager at the Center for Intellectual Property and Information Technology Law at Strathmore University in Kenya. She is the project lead for artificial intelligence research. This is a program at CPIT's Artificial Intelligence for Development Policy Center. She's a co-director of the Data Governance Research Center. She describes herself as driven, creative, meticulous, a research scientist with over 12 years experience in generating and using research evidence. She is interested in the means by which we can leverage science and technology to develop solutions to address the most pressing challenges facing the African continent. She's also interested in the intersection of emerging technologies, data, and policy in Africa, with a particular focus on climate change and energy. She holds a PhD in chemistry from Utah State University in the USA. So I would like at this point to hand over to the Secretary General, Professor Olushola Bandele Oyewole, who will take us through the program. He will make some remarks and then take us through the program. Thank you. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you very much, Madam Nodumo, and thanks for the introduction. Vice Chancellors, Presidents, Rectors, Pro-Vice Chancellors, and other institutional heads gathered today, colleagues from various African higher education institutions, our valued students, and our distinguished speakers that have been introduced so far, invited guests, distinguished participants, friends from the media, ladies and gentlemen, I warmly welcome you all to this high-level forum for African Vice Chancellors to discuss on artificial intelligence policy and governance, the role of government policies and institutional governance in shaping the use of artificial intelligence in higher education, including regulations, standards, and best practices. Dear guests, for us here at the Association of African Universities, and for all of us indeed, as higher education institutions across Africa, the African University Day is a special period where we get to celebrate the birth, or in this case, the establishment of the AAU some 56 years ago on November 12, 1967. Our celebration this year is on the theme of artificial intelligence in African higher education. We decided to prioritize holding this forum on artificial intelligence because whether we like it or not, artificial intelligence has come to impact the way we do things in our various universities. Today, our lecturers are not the only teachers in our classrooms, as artificial intelligence has come to complement the work of our teachers, or even serve as alternative teachers to our learners. Through artificial intelligence, our lecturers will now know that our learners will have access to more knowledge beyond their teachers and beyond what is delivered in the classrooms. Today, our teachers give assignments to the learners. It is most likely that it is ChatGPT that will carry out the assignment. This has become a body to many teachers. There is need for our institutions to evolve new innovative ways of assessment beyond the traditional ones. We need to be educated about artificial intelligence so that we can identify PhD and master theses that are original to the learners and not the compilation of ChatGPT. Some people have expressed the fear that very soon, artificial intelligence will take over the available job in the marketplace. But let us face the facts. Computers may be fast, but they are dull when compared to the human brain. The emergence of artificial intelligence should signal to our university leaders on the need to revise our curricula so that our learners will cultivate new skills and competencies needed for the new place of work. Ladies and gentlemen, artificial intelligence is already being used in universities and colleges, and these applications include chatbots, personalized learning platforms, and data analytics for student support. Our higher education institutions need to embrace artificial intelligence, and they should know how to leverage it while addressing the concerns. Indeed, artificial intelligence could help to improve students' learning outcomes, enhance administrative efficiencies in our various universities, and then reduce costs. The challenges associated with ethical concerns of artificial intelligence, data privacy, bias in algorithms, and job displacement need to be addressed head-on by leaders of our various institutions. As an association, we continue to be concerned about the use of artificial intelligence, and we believe that leaders in universities should be able to discuss this. And that's why our conversation of today is very important. I'm highly pleased to welcome Professor John Uoma Mugabe from the University of Pretoria, South Africa, and Dr. Ajlin Waregi from Kenya to share their opinions on this subject matter. Before I conclude, let me appreciate the over 180 people who are connected to this platform at this particular time, and to let you know that our conversation in this week will help to enhance the effectiveness of our university system in Africa. Thank you for coming. At this time, I will hand over to Professor John Mugabe for his presentation at this particular time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. Can you? Hello?
Yes, Prof, we can hear you.
Yes, I'm in a very noisy place. I'm actually in a hotel attending another conference by the African Union
Very
Commission.
clear. There's no noise disturbing you. Just go ahead.
There's no noise. You can't hear noise. No music.
No noise. You are very clear.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yes, technology seems to be working. So I sent slides, and I'm going to request that, if possible, those are projected, put on the screen so that we can go through them. I'm going to be making a number of general comments, and the first is that African universities cannot ignore engaging. They cannot avoid engaging in the overall governance of artificial intelligence, whether it's artificial intelligence for education, artificial intelligence for manufacturing, artificial intelligence for health. Universities have a major role to play because they are supposed to be actually sources of evidence to inform good governance, good practices in governing artificial intelligence. I'm also going to be making the point that universities, African universities, are relatively far ahead in terms of research in the technology or around the technology, ahead of policy. So on the continent generally, research in artificial intelligence practices are getting far ahead of policy and regulations, which raises a number of concerns. One of them is how do you ensure that, in fact, the technology and its application do not move too fast ahead of governance. The second related is what kind of capabilities African governments will require for effective governance of artificial intelligence. And there are many other issues. The next slide. So I'm going to go very quickly through the presentation. I'll make some statements about the character of artificial intelligence, why this technology is unique. What do we mean by governance for artificial intelligence? I'll then make some statements about emerging international policy and regulatory framework for governing artificial intelligence. What are some of the regimes, governance regimes that are being put in place by African countries at both continental and regional, at continental and national levels. Then focus a bit on the challenges and opportunities of governance of artificial intelligence. How do we ensure that, in fact, the continent, the African continent, African people maximize benefits from the technology, from artificial intelligence, while in fact managing any real or perceived of risks. I'll then end by suggesting some recommendations for building capacity or capacities for good governance of artificial intelligence. The next slide, please. Yes. So just about the technology, I don't want to go into definitions of what the technology is, but generally, it's agreed that this is one of the really new cognitive technologies. Cognitive in the sense that it embodies human mind, thoughts, actions. So within machine, or what sometimes called machine learning, there's now a new notion of machine doing. You have actually the cognitive aspects which are associated with human thinking, human doing, human ways of perceiving things. The big data we feed into these machines, our thinking, our ways of doing things. So it's really a cognitive technology, unlike most other technologies that are not cognitive. They rely largely on what we do. They don't operate without they operate based on what we decide them to do. But with artificial intelligence, we feed data into the machines, and the machines take over. So there's an issue of machine autonomy, human autonomy that we'll get to. So with these technologies, you have a lot of decision-making, problem-solving, learning. Human-machine interactions are very intense, very pronounced. You have also convergence of different disciplines, but also different technologies, data sciences, computing, behavioral sciences. So artificial intelligence is, to a large extent, a convergence of many technologies. It's not actually a single technology, it's a convergence of many technologies. Most of these technologies are pervasive, with applications across sectors, with impacts across sectors. So unlike the conventional old technologies, artificial intelligence is one that you can apply in health, in agriculture, in conservation, in mining, in manufacturing, in construction. So it's very pervasive in the sense of application, but also its impacts, the impacts of artificial intelligence are pervasive. They affect not just economic and social structures, they affect all aspects of human life, and is pervasive in that sense. The next slide. Yes, this technology is very disruptive, and it's changing companies, changing economies in unpredictable, in a very irreversible way, very disruptive. There are companies, there are jobs, there are actual social structures that are going to disappear if, again, the technology is not effectively, if the technology is not well managed. I think the other point to stress is that it's a very knowledge and information intensive technology. We talk of big data. Very few technologies today are as knowledge intensive, as information intensive as artificial intelligence. I think it's also important to recognize that the private sector hegemony, dominance is very pronounced with artificial intelligence. So it's one technology. Again, if there's no effective governance, that's going to be controlled by the corporate aggregates and government, civil society, all actors need to start putting in place effective mechanisms and instruments of governing artificial intelligence. And as all of us know, there is already a process within the United Nations about governance. There's even a discussion whether this should be a global treaty on artificial intelligence. Within the African Union, there is a major effort to develop Pan-African guidelines for artificial intelligence. And a number of countries, and I'll make reference to this, Rwanda, Egypt, and Mauritius have explicit policies for artificial intelligence. Many countries have frameworks that deal with different aspects of artificial intelligence, particularly protection of data. So there is increasing political and policy attention on artificial intelligence, but more needs to be done to ensure that we have the right policies and regulations. What do we mean by governance of artificial intelligence? Just briefly, by governance, we mean decision-making processes that ensure that the technology is developed in safe and ethical ways. The adoption and deployment of the technology are done in ethical, safe ways. So decision-making to ensure that countries manage the risks of the technology, just like all technologies, artificial intelligence will come definitely with social, economic, way the any risks. How do you manage the risks, and decision-making policy is important. The other, I think, point to note is that governance has two very important interrelated facets. One is the policy, which is the process of actions that governments decide to manage the technology, and the rules, the regulations they put in place to ensure that those policies are adhered to. So policy and regulations are very, very, very important for effective governance of artificial intelligence. Next slide, please. So I just want to outline what we think are key principles of good governance or effective governance of artificial intelligence. And I think the most important is trust, trustworthiness in artificial intelligence, trusting the capability of the state to govern the technology, and trusting in the governance regimes. If we don't trust the technology, if we don't trust the abilities of our governments to govern the technology, if we don't trust those policies and regulations that are put in place, we forget about it. And work that's being done by a number of organizations such as UNESCO, the Science Africa Foundation, that at the moment we have low levels of awareness of artificial intelligence, but also low levels of trust. And this raises a number of issues. Another important principle is ensuring transparency in the decision making. So the governance of artificial intelligence, the design and implementation of policies must be done in very transparent ways. So if you have a top-down approach to governance of artificial intelligence, it's not going to work. There'll be no trust. There'll be no transparency. So public participation, a very important principle of good governance of artificial intelligence. The next slide. Then accountability. Good governance of artificial intelligence must ensure that the developers and users of the technologies, the developers, companies, or research institutions, including universities, are accountable for whatever happens with artificial intelligence. And they're accountable in many ways, ensuring transparency, ensuring that the technology does not cause harm with any harm, ensuring that any risks are reduced. The developers must also be held accountable in enforcing the regulation, and the users as well. It's not just the developers, but also the users of the technology must be accountable, particularly for potential misuse. The technology is put out there, and in the education sector, for example, we already have artificial intelligence. So our students can misuse, can abuse the technology, and accountability is important to ensure that they don't. Frameworks for ensuring accountability. This is the key aspect of artificial intelligence. Then I think another principle is that is one of human autonomy. Human beings, society should not transfer the power, the authority, and autonomy to make critical decisions to artificial intelligence. Whether in the financial sector, in teaching, in all aspects of human life, you cannot transfer. We should not transfer human autonomy, and this is really a big concern that already there is some relaxation trying to transfer autonomy of human autonomy to the technology. Next slide. And I think the principles are very, very important. To enforce good governance based on those principles of transparency, accountability, ensuring human autonomy, we need the following. We must ensure that there's full disclosure, and a number of international regimes that I referred to shortly require that the developers and the users of the technology must disclose as much information about the technology, its uses, its potential impact on society, on economy. So full disclosure is critical to ensure that the principles are adhered. The second is that governments require competent authorities to undertake impact assessment to determine, in fact, what potential or real positive and or negative impacts the technology is making. So impact assessment must be part of the governance regime to ensure that we manage the technology. And then the slide there, point 3, is that the general public must be informed for accountability purposes and so on. The next slide. So there is also the issue of ensuring that countries build on prior existing scientific and technological capabilities on prior fields. And by this, artificial intelligence is going to just be precise, is going to take root, is going to be effectively managed in countries have certain capabilities, particularly digital information, digital transformative or transformation capability. So ICT infrastructure matters. There are other capabilities that are required, science capabilities. Countries that do not have strong science capabilities for example, if you think of human health, if you don't have strong capabilities in genomics, your entry into artificial intelligence will be very constrained. If you are thinking of manufacturing, if you don't have certain capabilities for production capabilities in the fourth industrial revolution, the Internet of Things, for example, you will not easily get into artificial intelligence, will not be able to manage the technology. So the point here is that you need to build on prior existing scientific capabilities to be able to manage the technology. Then you also require watching independent actors to manage the technology. Sorry, there's a bit of noise in my background. Then you need to use existing normative and rule-based governance instruments, policies, regulations. For example, you need the public protection of data, personal data, that privacy of data protection laws. You need to build those. So you require mixes of policy instruments to effectively manage that. Next slide. So there's a number of key regulations in health. We have WHO guidelines on ethics of artificial intelligence, and those guidelines articulate the principles that I referred to earlier on. Next slide. Then you have the UNESCO recommendations on ethics of artificial intelligence, and this, I think, where the universities need to be really concerned. In 2021, 2022, UNESCO member states, which are mainly UN member states, adopted the UNESCO recommendation that has those key principles, but it's also to prepare countries for artificial intelligence governance, ethics of artificial intelligence. And UNESCO has developed what are called the readiness frameworks for governing artificial intelligence. I'm on the UNESCO panel that has developed readiness framework. So countries can assess themselves how ready they are to effectively govern artificial intelligence to ensure that there is responsible or ethical development and application of artificial intelligence. And the UNESCO recommendation is very critical. It's not unlike the WHO one. The UNESCO recommendation covers almost all sectors, social and economic sector. Next slide. Then you have the UNESCO recommendation on open science, which all universities sector which we all about, and they embody many of those recommendations. Now the issues are around open science. How do you ensure that in fact you have collaborative science at the same time dealing with the issues of intellectual property protection, and you can discuss this later. But the principles again are related to good governance of artificial intelligence. There is a strong emphasis on open science leading to good governance of artificial intelligence. Next slide. Then there is the OECD recommendation on artificial intelligence, which is very recent. Just to bring to attention, this mainly for OECD countries. None of countries, African countries, are full members. South Africa has observer status on the OECD, but the OECD recommendation on artificial intelligence are really Africa. and the African Union efforts to develop guidelines, African guidelines on artificial intelligence, drawing largely on the OECD recommendation. Again, it has the principles line earlier on. The next slide. So let's look a bit at Africa, and this is recent work with there's very low levels of awareness that artificial intelligence not trust in the technology. And unfortunately, the debate is around the risks of the technology in many places about how.
Prof, sometimes your voice goes low. So maybe if you could speak closer to the microphone. Thank you.
I'm actually very close.
Okay.
I'm going to type. Yes, sorry. So I'm saying this for no public awareness and trust, awareness of and trust in artificial intelligence on the continent at the moment. And then there's just no literacy, policy literacy in what governments and civil society groups are doing already. In some countries already have some at least implicit policy frameworks, but those are not known by many of the stakeholders, even by governments themselves. For example, the protection of public data regulation laws are not known and are not effectively being utilized to govern artificial intelligence. So low literacy. Then there's fragmentation of institutions. In many countries, particularly the three countries that have now explicit policies, Mauritius, Egypt, and Rwanda, artificial intelligence is being handled as an ICT sector, while in practice, as you said, it's very pervasive and fragmentation of regulatory structure is an emerging concern in some countries where the technology is being advanced. And we need to address this in policy, but also in creating the necessary competent authorities to govern the technology. Next slide. Next slide, please. Yes, then there, as I said, there are very few countries, the continent that have explicit policies. I already stated that, in fact, many countries have some implicit policies, particularly data protection regulatory frameworks, but only, to the best of my knowledge, only 3 countries have institutionalized explicit policies for artificial intelligence, and those are Egypt, Mauritius, and Rwanda. I've heard about Nigeria policy cabinet, Morocco having strategy going to cabinet, and maybe the Nigeria and Morocco already have that policy. And then there are very few countries that have explicit have programs, R&D programs with expenditure, R&D expenditure on artificial intelligence. Now, there's a very interesting piece of work that just came from the Ministry of ICT Rwanda, which shows the economic benefits of artificial intelligence to Rwanda. And very interesting, but then that piece of work does not necessarily indicate how much money Rwanda should put into R&D in artificial intelligence. And as I said, this is a very knowledge-intensive technology. If you are not investing in R&D in artificial intelligence, you are unlikely to reap its benefits. It's like unlike the other ICT technology, artificial intelligence is largely based on data, and data science is important, which is really an R&D field. The next slide. So building capabilities, and this is my last slide. we need to build the public constituency awareness raising, policy literacy. We need to create platforms for dialogue for all stakeholders, researchers, civil society, and the industry. And a lot of that is starting to happen. I know literally every other day there are now workshops, conferences. I'm here in Cape Town at the African Union session to review institutional science, technology, and innovation starting for Africa. And there are issues of artificial intelligence that are going to be considered. So we need multi-stakeholder platforms. We will build strong constituencies for governing artificial intelligence. There is a proposal to establish an African artificial intelligence fund. And then I made reference to the African artificial intelligence framework. We need to disseminate information about the WHO, UNESCO, OECD, and the African Union frameworks. These are not, by the way, known. UNESCO did a review in 2021, 2022, Sub-Saharan Africa, where it became very clear that in most countries, people do not know what the governance framework, the global ones are, the national ones are, or at least implicit. The next slide. Yes, so I think that's the end of it. So, colleagues, my point is very simple. It's building capability for Africa to effectively govern the technology. Universities in a number of countries, particularly South Africa, Kenya, Tunisia, Mauritius, the universities in some of these countries are doing relatively good, relatively intense research on artificial intelligence. And you can see that in terms, if you do the geometric analysis, the number of publications from universities on artificial intelligence or related areas increasing, that in countries where there's no governance. So research is ahead of governance, the technology, procurement, development are ahead of governance, which is also an opportunity that we can use for R&D and practice to inform policy. And I want to use that universities, African universities, and the Association of African Universities should play a major role in getting governments to have national, regional, and continental governance framework. In addition to which, the university having its own institutional framework for artificial intelligence around it for managed data teaching, education, but also for research. Because the impacts of artificial intelligence are not just around teaching, the way students are going to be engaged, how exams are going to be managed, but also universities are doing research in genomics, in manufacturing related areas, engineering, where the technology is being is going to be deployed. So ethical, responsible development and application of artificial intelligence rest in universities actually more than any other action. And the continent, I think the African universities should serve sorry, colleagues, for taking long and very much bad now. Hello, that's the end of my presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor John Uma Mugabe. I think that was very informative, very well prepared, and I'm sure the colleagues appreciate it. I'm trying to identify some questions in the chat. so that we get into questions maybe for the next 10 minutes. So those that would like to ask questions can also raise their hands so that we do a bit of both. Okay, I would give the floor to Professor Babatunde and Dr. Rashid Seraj and Professor Martin Domo Trineboa in that order, please. Thank you. Okay, let me help you so that you unmute. Thank you, because
yes, thank you very much.
yeah, thank you.
Yes, I am Dr. Babatunde Lawal, an associate professor from Lagos State University of Education, Nigeria. My question is an enlightenment question. I want to know the relationship between AI and publications in terms of when you write and you try to consult AI to supplement your work, and you submit such article for publication, reviewers will be saying similarity index is high and so on and so forth. And when you try to humanize such submission, you still have some challenges. How do we go around this as a researcher? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Babatunde. The next one is Dr. Rashid Seraj, followed by Professor Martin Domo and Professor Abdullahi Yahaya, then Dr. Jaume Fortuny. Yeah. So after that, then Professor Mugabe can answer. I'm also taking down the questions. Yes.
Yeah. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, please. We can.
Well, thank you very much. I am Rashid Siraj from University Mohammed VI Polytechnic in Morocco. And I thank the speaker, Prof. Mugabe, for this brilliant presentation, very comprehensive. I have just a simple question, because he mentioned the development of the African Union artificial intelligence policy framework. But I was wondering on the scope for developing the framework. When is it predicted to be ready? And also related to that, my question is somehow, aren't we putting the cart before the horse, or vice versa, in all this? In other words, has Africa now developed enough applications for AI in all commercial sectors and for its development to start developing the regulation policy, or should we start with that? I don't know if my question is clear in that. I wanted to hear more about the prospect for applications. What will Africa get out of this before they started looking at all the bureaucratic side of it somehow? But I'm interested to hear the views about the framework, the EU framework. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rashid. Professor Martin Domo Trineboa.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I am Professor Martin Domo Trineboa, the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Technology at Universidade Aberta, UNICED in Mozambique. When we talk about AI is now the big elephant in the room when it comes to IT research. But as Madame Nodumo said in her opening remarks about some latest news about some countries trying to get a forum to discuss AI. It is now getting into the sphere of policy and national interest. So if we are not careful, whatever research we are doing in AI is going to get buried in policies. So in order to get AI a footing, we need to also look at the research in the other way around. How do we counter the abuse of the use of AI? Because when internet came into use, people did not take into consideration the abuse of the internet. Now it is a runaway train, and companies and states are spending billions of dollars to control this runaway train in terms of hacking and security and all those things. So as we go along with research in AI, we should also focus on research to mitigate the abuse of AI. Otherwise, all whatever we are doing are going to end up nowhere. Just like good research projects like the stem cell research and other research which got buried because of policies. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Martin. I would give the floor to Professor Abdullahi Yahaya, and then we will pause for Professor Mugabe to respond before I give the floor to Dr. Yogesh and Dr. Gambo Yusuf. Yeah, thank you. Let me ask you to unmute. Yeah.
Thank you. Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. Correction, I'm not a professor. I'm just Mr. Abdullahi Yahaya, a student.
I can hardly hear.
Hello?
Yes, if you can speak up, thank you.
Okay, yes, of CEFTA, that's Center for Food Technology and Research, Benue State University, Makurdi, Nigeria. So I have a question, maybe, I don't know how I can put it. How can we apply this artificial intelligence for developing of local production in terms of agricultural activities that is being carried out outside the cities where insecurity of kidnapping and the rest, because it's to say like a drone for you to in some like farms, very large capacity farms, they need maybe drones in terms of spraying chemicals and what have you. So now, if you take even common motorized sprayers to farm, so these people may kidnap or will kidnap somebody, and especially here in the northern part of Nigeria, we are having this problem. I don't know how this thing will be addressed in Africa if the intellectuals are improving or advancing in this AI. So the local content for us to get the raw materials in industries will be very difficult because of this insecurity.
Thank you so much, sir. Yeah, thank you so much. I think we will allow Professor Mugabe to respond. There was a question on the relationship between AI and publications, a question around the African Union Commission AI policy framework, its scope, what the timelines are. Are we not putting the cart before the horse? Have we developed enough applications in Africa to be talking about policies at such a scale? Then Professor Martin, I think it was a comment, but he focused on AI is the big elephant in the room. We made mistakes, maybe now internet is a runaway train in terms of hacking and security issues. Could we focus on research to mitigate the abuse of AI? Then the last speaker spoke about, are there possibilities to apply AI to agriculture while addressing security issues in places like northern Nigeria? Over to you, Professor Mugabe. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the questions. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, Prof. Yes, we can.
I'm asking now, there's a lot of noise in my background. Just quick, not answers, but comments on the questions and also comments that have been made by colleagues. One is the use of artificial intelligence to generate publications. I think it's an ethical issue. Even without this technology, there's a lot of unethical issues regarding publications by researchers, and we all know those. So I'm not sure that the artificial intelligence is going to necessarily worsen the situation, may, but there's no evidence that. It also has to do just with again, ethics. What ethical framework universities put in place, publishers put in place to ensure that you don't use or actually misuse the technology to get all kinds of publications. There are also issues to do with the use of the technology to even peer review publication. It's a big, I mean, it's a big issue. So my own response is going with one, universities, publishers, reviewers need to have a clear ethical guidelines and the assessment system to make sure that it's not, you don't get into abuse of the technology. There was the question about the putting the cart before the horse. I mean, I think that's a right place to be. My own view is that we need the policy and technology to co-evolve. The technology should not be ahead of the policy, or the policy should not necessarily follow. But we also don't want to put policy in place without the technology. So the bad analogy I give to my students is where you don't have cars, but you have robots and traffic lights. So a country does not have cars at all, but has traffic rules and robots. We're spending money on policemen to manage the robots, traffic lights, but there are no cars. But when you have cars, you need traffic rules, you need robots or traffic lights. So co-evolution of the technology with the policy. And there's a very good literature now that demonstrates that, in fact, as you develop the technology, you need governance instruments and mechanisms. And that's what is happening now within the UN, the Secretary General of the UN's appeal to start developing a global framework is possible treaty to govern artificial intelligence based on this. The technology is already moving, but we don't have policy. And we need policies that not restrain the development of the technology, but assist to govern the development and use of the technology. So my suggestion there would be one about co-evolution of policy and the technology, so that one is not left behind. And there are ways of doing it. The African Union process, I don't have the latest information about it, but what I know is that it's an expert-led process. There are concerns about it. It's not adequately environmental. It's not multi-stakeholder. And it's what has been produced so far by the African Union Commission is almost like an issues paper. It's not a governance framework. And this afternoon we are going to do, I'm sure we are going to be discussing this later at this meeting that I'm attending here in Cape Town to review the science, technology, and innovation strategy for Africa 2024 and get into developing a new strategy. The issue of, I think an important point which I want to emphasize was made by one of the colleagues is about research on risk and research to govern artificial intelligence is very important. So you can do research, develop the technology to apply the technology, but you also need research to ensure that you govern the technology appropriately, and that's why impact assessment is important. As I noted, one of the principles in artificial intelligence is ensuring that you have one of the requirements for effective governance, ensuring that you have a competent authority for impact assessment. And that competent authority will need to be operating on the basis of research on potential risks. So tools such as technology assessment, which enable a country or an organization to assess the risks and benefits of the technology are very important. I think the issue of application in agriculture is straightforward. I want just to emphasize that unlike many other technologies, artificial intelligence is pervasive, so the applications are not just in agriculture. The same technology is applied in health, in manufacturing, in conservation, and which essentially offer opportunities. In agriculture, I think there are going to be issues to do with the convergence of artificial intelligence with other technologies such as gene editing, genomics, biotechnology. And there you have a very complex ethical issue because you are dealing with code, and code is ethically sensitive. So just like in health, we will have a lot of ethical considerations to address. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization is embarking or has embarked in the process to develop guidelines for application of artificial intelligence in agriculture. So I think that's, I'm not answering the question, just my comments on the questions that were raised. And
Okay, thank you, Prof. I think that
I'll have to run very soon. They are signaling to me that I need to.
Okay, how many more minutes do you have?
Maximum of 10.
Okay, I just want to take 3 questions and then you can answer them, then we can go to the next speaker. So can I ask Dr. Yogesh Awashti and Dr. Bariham Itrusu, Professor Bai Blyden, those 3 questions in that order, and then he will answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. And thank you for the wonderful presentation. I have one question because I'm working in Africa University, Zimbabwe here as a dean of the college. So because, in the whole world, there are two types of people. One is a consumer and other is a developer. So what is your idea? Because we are, as African countries, we are very good in use of technology. But what is the position of African continent in AI tools development, and how we can enhance those tools for improving our nations also? Because consumption of the tool is not only a solution, we should also be a part of the development. So what is your suggestion for those frameworks? Thank you.
Thank you so much. The next speaker, please. Yeah.
Yes. Good afternoon, Ghana time, to all the participants and our presenters in this very important webinar. My name is Dr. Barham Idrisu, a lecturer, Faculty of Education, University for Development Studies, Ghana. I'd like to ask two questions relating to the subject under discussion. The first question is, I would like to find out from the policymakers and those of us in academia, how can we as academics in Africa leverage the opportunities that AI presents to us as researchers in African universities without compromising the quality of service and ethical issues in our various universities? Number two, how can we also employ AI to improve on the quality of research we are supporting to generate in our various universities to improve the quality of teaching and learning and the quality of research we are conducting without violation of ethical issues and others? So these are the few gray areas I would like my professors and vice chancellors to be able to support us so that if they can throw more light on that. And thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Idrisu, Professor Bai Blyden, and then Dr. Gambo Yusuf, and then we close.
Good.
Well, thank you, and good afternoon to everyone. First of all, I'm not a professor. I come from a family of professors, but I'm not one myself. My background is in power engineering, the design of power plants and power systems, and for many years, I've been working on a model that I call it the African Development Knowledge Engine. And the opportunities we have with AI are so enormous, but the real opportunity is in use it for training at this time, where because of the data that exists in our own reality, plus the power that AI affords, we can create an environment where our own data is generated and simulated. In other words, we should be embarking on a massive simulation training. And one of the recommendations I've made, unfortunately, I have not yet presented it to Professor Oyewole, but I have kind of kept him notified of certain developments, and that is being able to look at a standardized curriculum adopted throughout the university system. It would almost mimic what we call in the nuclear industry enrichment. By doing that, everybody's speaking from the same template, and that template can be found in a study that the Electric Power Research Institute has done in the United States. It's still ongoing, but basically they're looking at the impact of all these new technologies on economies through the year 2050. And the basic thesis, I'm suggesting that we align ourselves with that program because it was supported by 200 institutions from around the world, manufacturers, universities, and so forth. And out of that, derive a standardized curriculum that we could all jump on and that's applied to your own African reality. And there's a lot more detail, and hopefully with time I'll be able to present it in more detail. But with AI and everything we have now, that becomes our decision support system to accelerate development training.
Thank you so much, Mr. Blyden. Thank you. Dr. Gambo Yusuf.
Yes, I'm available.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, that's beautiful. Good afternoon, everybody. Our distinguished vice chancellors, our presenters. My name is Dr. Yusuf Gambo from Adamawa State University, Mubi, Nigeria, Northern Nigeria. I'm so interested in this wedding presentation and all the contribution made by our participants. My only worry is in line with what Dr. Yogis has said. Our framework, as far as AI is concerned, should not only look at regulations, but also look at possibility of making us to be developers, because Africa has been seen around the world as a dumping ground. And I'm sure that with the coming of AI today, we can leverage the opportunity given to us by AI, especially in the academia, whereby we'll be able to use it to be able to improve, our research, improve our curriculum development. So my suggestion and my fear is, how do we inculcate this framework into our curriculum to ensure that we have a robust curriculum that does not just make us to be digital immigrants, but we want to be digital immigrants, people that can be able to use the AI. And of course, looking at what we have today, the kind of students we have that are smart enough has gone beyond even some of the lecturers, outlive the experience of the lecturers we have in the Nigeria, especially in African universities. So how do we bring into our framework in such a way that our lecturers, our research persons in the university are also up to date with the current happening around AI in education and AI in different
Okay, I think our last...
so that our own graduates will be able to be able to deliver and be.
Okay, Dr. Gambo Yusuf, I think we got the gist of your question. Professor Mugabe, are you still around? Maybe he's had to drop off.
No, I'm just about to drop off.
Yes,
yeah. So I'll make just a very, yes.
Yes, you can make some comments and then drop off. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, colleagues, for not actually questions, but very useful comments and suggestions. I think there's the issue of whether Africa should just be and with artificial intelligence, as we know, it's a very knowledge-intensive for technology, it's science-driven. If you don't, if you are not able to do research on the technology and for the technology, you'll not be able to use it. It's that simple. So to be able to be a user of the technology, you must be able to also be a good developer. To be able to manage the technology, you need to be able to know what the technology is all about, and therefore research on artificial intelligence and for artificial intelligence is quite important. I think the issue of about the academia leveraging artificial intelligence very important. The opportunities are there because academia is not just about teaching. Universities are not just there to teach, but universities also produce knowledge. So the use of artificial intelligence to produce knowledge, but also doing research on artificial intelligence. And as I indicated, a number of universities are now really doing relatively well in the area of R&D in artificial intelligence or artificial intelligence. And the universities can actually are going to be the drivers of artificial intelligence. Now the concern is what kinds of arrangements what kinds of support governments and the corporate actors will give to universities. And some of us argue that, in fact, soft instruments, particularly public-private partnerships, are the way to go. On Friday, there was a big meeting in Nairobi, and some universities were represented, organized by Microsoft. And we focused on this kind of issues, partnerships between academia and industry to advance artificial intelligence in Africa. So I think those are my comments. Just my last statement is that universities must provide leadership, intellectual, technical leadership for good governance, effective governance of artificial intelligence in Africa. I'll end it at that.
Yes, we thank you most sincerely, Professor John Mugabe. We know your schedule is busy, but you sacrificed to be with us. So thank you very much. Allow me, please, to ask Dr. Angeline Wairegi to take the floor. She's a research manager at the Center for Intellectual Property and Information Technology Law at Strathmore University in Kenya. So I don't know whether you are able to share your slides or you'd like me to support you.
I think I should be able to share my
Yeah.
slides. Okay, if anything goes wrong, then you can
Yeah.
jump in.
Thank you so much. You are most welcome.
Thank you. I'd like to begin by just thanking the conveners of this great event for the invitation. It's such a pleasure to be included in this wonderful and very important discourse. To begin with...
Can you put the slide in presentation mode? Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So to begin with, I'd just like to maybe give a little bit of context about the organization I work with and how we're placed in academia. It's a little bit unconventional, I would say. So CIPIT, which is the Center for Intellectual Property and Information Technology Law, is actually an independent research center that is housed under Strathmore University. So we began about 10 years ago. We celebrated our 10-year anniversary last year, and we really began looking at IP research and IP-related issues, and then we've just sort of grown from there. So our focus currently is on issues around emerging technologies and policy. So issues at the intersection of those two things and how they impact the African continent. So off of that, we have 4 different departments that are looking at different areas of research. So we have a data policy center where we conduct issues around data. We have an ICT and IP department, and then relevant to this talk, we have an artificial intelligence for development policy center. So it's under this center where we look at AI in Africa, and we do that in sort of the broadest sense. So at the beginning of the inception of the policy center, we really tried to do just one important thing. And this has kind of been touched on by different people in the audiences. So at the beginning of our life as an AI for D policy center, we really wanted to establish if there is an AI ecosystem at all in Africa and what that really means. So from that, we were able to determine that there exists AI in Africa, but I think it's best to think of it as two distinct things. So there is AI that we import in, so AI technologies that we get from the US or the UK or the EU or China, and we use these tools. We input our data, we input our questions, and we use these tools, but we are not the originators of these AI technologies. Then there's another AI ecosystem that is found on the continent where we are the originators. We are developing these tools, right? We are governing the development process. We are thinking about the needs that we have on the continent and trying to leverage these AI tools for those solutions. So both of these are coexisting within the continent. Unfortunately, or fortunately, unfortunately, I think the former is largely what we're seeing. So someone used a very interesting word, consumer. So we're largely, at this point, consumers of AI technologies other than developers. But we do have an emerging developer scene on the continent. And really what my talk will be about is the latter part of this AI ecosystem. The AI ecosystem that is developed here or by us for solutions or to find solutions for problems that we have on the continent. All right. So AI, we already have discussed AI is in simplest form. AI technologies are really tools that can think, right? They are tools, they're still human-enabled endeavors in that we are the ones who set the parameters of what we want these tools to do. But what is really interesting and unique and exciting about AI is that if it is trained, it can then go ahead and learn from that training and move a step further, right? So AI has predictive abilities. If I had to give the two most important qualities of AI, like why do we care about AI at this time? It's one, its ability to process a large amount of data. And two, its ability to look at that data and identify patterns that we might not be able to. So those are the two biggest qualities that make AI such an important tool. Now, AI has been billed as the solution to honestly everything under the sun. It's the silver bullet that will cure all and eliminate all that ails us, especially when we talk about the narrative that we're seeing around AI in Africa. It is still very much at the techno-optimism stage, where we believe that by leveraging these AI tools, we'll be able to find solutions, or at least mitigate some of the problems that we have on the continent. Now, that could be true, that could not be true, but I think the concern here is buying into that narrative without really critically analyzing it. The concern here is not only importing the AI technologies, but also importing the narratives around those technologies without really assessing whether the impacts of these AI tools on the continent will be largely positive or will negatively affect us. So I think the number one thing that we really need to do just throughout this talk is just keep in mind that we really need to look at AI from the perspective of Africa and the perspective of Africans. So we are a unique continent with unique characteristics, unique demographics, and unique problems. So we need to apply that lens when we're talking about AI and not simply copy and paste the narratives around these tools that we've seen from other places, mainly the big three, the EU, the US, the UK, and China, I guess the big four now. So that's the first thing. All right, so at CIPIT, what we're really doing is we're trying to understand what this African AI ecosystem looks like. And I believe it's Dr. Awashi who asked whether there is actually an African AI ecosystem, or we're simply consumers. And Professor Siraj also touched on this a little bit, whether we have applications the continent at all, or have sufficient applications to even start talking about governance structures around this applications. So the first thing, as I mentioned, when we started the AI for D Policy Center, was really understanding, is there an African AI ecosystem? And at the crux of that is trying to define, what do we mean by African AI? Right, so the first definition, or the first characteristic, is just AI in general. So African AI has to really align with what AI is in general, right? So it is a technological tool that has cognitive abilities, as Professor Mugabe said, right? It's generated with algorithms, whether that's machine learning, deep learning, neural networks, whatever it is, but there are certain technological parameters that all AI sort of falls under. The second characteristics we wanted to look at is it's African AI if it's developed by startups or by developers within the African continent. Or it's developed by startups that are maybe in the diaspora, but mainly made up of Africans for African problems, specific for African problems, to be used specifically in Africa. And the other thing was, we wanted to make sure that at this time of this project, that these companies, the startups, these AI technological tools were operational, and that the companies that we were looking at were also operational. So this is how we were defining African AI. So the first thing we did to understand whether the African AI was a thing was to map, well, do we even have AI applications that are being developed on the continent or developed by African developers, even if they're in the diaspora, for our unique set of problems and for use within the continent? So we did a mapping, and we discovered, I think, 3 really important things. One, unlike AI applications, let's say in the United States, the AI tools or the AI technologies that we're seeing developed in Africa fall under 4 very narrow sectors. Largely, the tools we're seeing developed are being developed for the health sector, the agricultural sector, education, or fintech. That's largely where we're seeing AI activity. And it kind of makes sense, right? So if we're looking at AI development across the board, what we're really seeing is AI being leveraged to be used sort of like a stopgap measures, or to be used as a bridge for some missing resource, excuse me, whether it's infrastructural, whether it's a human resource, whether it's some other kind of thing. So we're really seeing these tools being developed sort of as stopgap measures. So it makes sense that these 4 sectors would have the highest AI activity. The other thing that we're seeing is that AI activity is concentrated in a couple of areas in Africa. So broadly, we see AI activity to varying degrees in the southern regions of Africa, in the eastern regions, in the western, and in the north. So the the central region of Africa, excuse me, seems to be a bit of a dead zone, for lack of a better word, as far as AI activity. In those other 4 regions, the rate of development, or even just development in general, really varies from country to country. So if you look at West Africa, for example, majority of AI activity is concentrated in Nigeria and Ghana. If we look at East Africa, we see a lot of the activity concentrated in Rwanda and in Kenya. So really what I'm trying to say is that it is not, it's not homogeneous, it's not standard. You just have these pockets of AI activity, and the reasons for this really vary, right? It's either lack of digital infrastructural capacity. AI development takes up a lot of computational power, it requires a lot of digital infrastructure. So if that's not available, then that will really hamper development. So whether it's knowledge capacities, right? Do we have people who are capable of actually developing these tools or not? So AI activity is varied. In terms of adoption, adoption strangely mirrors the development in terms of like activity. So the areas where you have high AI activity in terms of development, you also tend to have high adoption rates for these tools. So if you would like to see more about the AI applications in use, I should mention currently, this is a very dynamic tool. We are continuously updating it. But if you would like to see more about this, you can go to the CIPIT website, and I will also provide these tools to our host, this PowerPoint to our host, so you can have access to it as well. So the answer to the first question, is there an African AI ecosystem, after this mapping, was a definitive and definite yes. So we are developing these tools, and I think even more importantly, we are adopting these tools. Whether it is the ones that we're developing or the ones that are being imported in. So we are utilizing AI. The next thing we try to understand is, if we do say there's an African AI ecosystem, who are the players in this? Who is powering AI development, AI adoption? Who is regulating, if any regulation is taking place? Who is adopting these tools? And what is the impact, if any, from these different stakeholders and their interactions? So the very first thing we did was ask ourselves, is there a way of identifying and characterizing the stakeholders within this AI ecosystem that's emerging on the continent? Is there a way that makes sense for us to talk about these players that would reflect our reality in Africa? So to do that, we thought that it was best to develop new language, and we created this normative stakeholder framework, which is really categorizing AI players by their roles in 3 main areas. One, in financial, or in provision of financial opportunity to people on the African continent, in their role in the political environment, so we call this legitimacy, and then in their role as community leaders, or we call this authenticity, so holders of the African identity. So we try to think of these as characteristics we could use to identify who is responsible for what and who's accountable for what. So for example, if we are looking at a tool that's being used in the fintech industry, this would fall under the financial opportunity normative claim. So we're saying that this tool should be able to be utilized to provide income, revenue for the people using it. And furthermore, it should not hinder people's ability to provide income or to better their lives economically. So given that, then who are the stakeholders responsible in its development? Who are the stakeholders responsible in regulating it to make sure that it doesn't disadvantage or disenfranchise people from a financial sense? So we thought this was the best way to think about the AI stakeholder, or the AI stakeholders, sorry, on the continent, given that we want these AI tools to actually be beneficial and to be beneficial to us from a broad spectrum of views. So again, if you would like to read more about the normative stakeholder claim, that's available on the CIPIT website. So please feel free to go on there and read a little bit more about those claims. All right, so we've established that there is one, an African AI ecosystem. Two, we've done our best to characterize the players. And then the next step after that was really trying to understand or to analyze critically, well, what are the opportunities of this technology? And trying to analyze that, as I mentioned before, from an African lens. So the possible impacts of AI have been talked about ad nauseum, but they've really been talked about from sort of a Western or global perspective, right? The narratives that we're getting generally originate from the West. So what we're trying to say is, all right, given what they're saying that AI could be leveraged to do, and given what we're seeing on the continent with the obstacles and opportunities here, well, what is actually a viable use and a reasonable impact of these tools? So what are the opportunities in using these AI tools? So the first is really trying to understand how AI can be leveraged to really propel economic progress on the continent. So on a number of levels. So whether it's a national level, whether it is on a community level, or whether it's on an individual level. So AI tools could be used to meet a lot of the sustainable development goals that nations have, one of which is alleviating poverty, right? So I was actually having a conversation on how Bangladesh is actually already using AI tools to analyze poverty levels across its borders in a very dynamic way. So they can identify factors that would either increase or decrease, the income generation capability of the nation and how that would affect its people. So you can use AI tools in such a way to allocate financial assistance from the government to different regions of a country based on the predictive ability of these AI tools. You can also use AI tools on a more individual level. We've already seen things like ChatGPT being used by gig economy workers or by people who work for themselves to train them in new skills or to refine skills that they can use to grow their business. So AI can be used to further economic progress. There's also AI developed in Africa could be used to provide contextualized solutions to the problems that we have. So I want to emphasize here really that it's AI developed in Africa, or data training sets that are developed here to train AI tools, maybe developed elsewhere. But really the crux of this argument is we need tools and data developed here to really provide solutions that are on a granular level applicable to us. So a good a good example of this is climate models. So we have climate models already in use, and climate models can be used for a number of things. One, mitigating the effects of climate change. Two, helping lower the food insecurity crisis on the continent, right? But a lot of these climate models are using weather data that's collected on a very high level, I should say. So the data that they have, the weather data that they have, excuse me, is very broad or very general. It's not localized to, let's say, a particular county in Kenya. And two, this data is missing a lot of historical information. So with AI, the training data that you use is really, really the foundation of the results that you get, right? Your results are only as accurate or as comprehensive as the data, as a training data set that you used. So if we were able to actually develop our own data sets, develop our own algorithms, develop AI technologies based off of this, I think it would give us, one, better control to really providing solutions to problems that are very unique to us. So the third thing, is really the benefits from data that could accrue. So right now, unfortunately, we tend to be importers of AI technology and then exporters of our data. So if you think about even something as simple as your entertainment. So if you have things like a Netflix or another streaming account like Showmax, so what you're doing is that is AI technology, I should say, first of all. All those suggestions of what you should watch next are, predictive analysis from AI tech. But what we're doing is when we input that data is going to an external party, and we really don't know, we don't really know or have much control on what happens to that data afterwards. But if we had more control about the tools that we were using, the tools that we were developing, then we could better control how we benefited from the data that we input into these tools. So equitable benefits from data are something that we should really start talking about in terms of African AI and how this ecosystem develops going forward. And with that, we also have the conversations around data sovereignty, right? If you own that data, then you have a lot more leverage on what you can do or what can be done, or how you can really use that data to your benefit. You have a lot more bargaining power. So I think that's something that we also need to have discussions around. So there are benefits around these tools, but I think the conversation needs to be, how can we contextualize these benefits, and how can we make sure that these benefits are equitable to all and are inclusive for all? Which gets to the second thing. So there are benefits, but there are obstacles to attaining these benefits. Unfortunately, if we are to be big players in terms of developing and even adopting AI tools, in terms of leveraging these tools to our benefits, I think there's a lot more growth that needs to happen on the continent. So I'd like to divide this into two different groupings. One is things we need to consider, or factors we need to consider when we're talking about AI development, and the other is factors we need to consider when we're talking about AI adoption. So in terms of development, as I've mentioned before, creating AI technologies takes a lot of computing power. That's the first thing. At present, unfortunately, we are limited in a lot of the computational infrastructure that we require to build a lot of these tools, right? So if we look at just the hardware, for example, if we were to even store data, we don't have a lot of data storage centers located on the continent. If we were thinking about things like computing power, things like supercomputers are not really widely available on the continent, and the cost of them is really prohibitive. So we really need to start thinking, how can we democratize this access to this type of infrastructure so we're able to build our own tools? Even simple things like electricity and Wi-Fi. If you're going to build an AI-enabled tool, then you need to have reliable and consistent, electricity and access to, what things like Wi-Fi. And in some areas that is available, but in a lot of parts of the continent, it is not. In terms of financial resources, when we were doing our research, what we identified is, well, one of two things when it came to financial resources. One, most of the pool of money that goes to developers on the continent does not originate from the continent. So you have a lot of international bodies that are funding the development, the piloting, and the scale up of these tools, right? So there are questions around what that really means in terms of the scope of what we can develop in terms of the ethics. If the money is coming elsewhere, are there strings attached? So there are conversations to have around that. So that's number one. Number two is that the financial resources, that are available from these bodies are very narrow in scope. So you mostly get foundational resources. So you'll get exploratory money to explore tools that you could develop. You'll get money to pilot something, but from piloting to scale up, we see quite a drop off in the funding available. So if you look at our mapping of applications, the lifetime or the period of existence for these tools tends to be between 18 to 30 months. So that's the development to pilot scale. And then if you can't get funding for you to be able to scale up your technology and get it into the market, then it tends to die off. So that's something that we also need to have a conversation around. How can we be able to participate successfully in this AI development market if we don't have the resource? Then the other thing we also saw is that there is slowly private local players that are starting to provide some funding to AI startups. It's still very limited, but for example, in Kenya, you have big telecom companies that are starting to recognize the importance of AI and locally developed AI and are starting to throw money into the game. So that is happening, but it's still lagging far behind the needs of AI developers. The next obstacle, in AI development in Africa is knowledge asymmetries, right? What you need to know to develop these tools and who has this knowledge is very unequal. So from a educational level, what you need to develop these tools is largely STEM related, if we're talking about the technical aspects of it. And that goes directly into things like curriculum that we have across the continent in higher educational institutions, but also on our primary or high school level. It makes more sense, and this is what we see in a lot of European countries, to really start the children young when it comes to technological education, right? So if you are going to have a large pool of talent that can go into development of AI technologies, then it makes more sense to start educating them young and then just build on that education as they go along the educational pipeline. But there are concerns around, one, updating of the curriculum, whether that's been done, whether it's sufficient, if it has been done, and two, infrastructural problems, and also financial and human resource problems. So if we're talking about educating people, do we, one, have the technological capacities in universities, in high schools, in primary, to make it a viable venue for education? Two, do we have the instructors who have this knowledge to pass on to the students? And then the third thing is, when it comes to education, what we've seen in our research is we tend to work, or there tends to be silos, right? So the universities are teaching what they're teaching, but then industry is saying this is what we need, and they're not speaking to one another. So when you have graduates entering the workforce, there's a misalignment between what they need in terms of, one, the digital economy, development skills, developer skills, and what they were taught universities. So there isn't a communication between the academic body, the industry, and even government, who sets a lot of these national educational strategies. So that's a conversation that needs to happen as well. In terms of knowledge asymmetries as well, we need to talk about the rural-urban divide. What does it mean?
Excuse me, Dr. Wairegi. I think we have 5 minutes before the session
yes.
ends. Yeah, thank you.
I'm nearly done. So the other thing we need to talk about is the rural-urban divide when it comes to knowledge asymmetries. What does it really mean if the knowledge or the digital education is mainly done in the urban areas? That means that the only people really participating in this development are from the urban areas. What does that mean for those people from the rural areas? Does that not entrench existing inequalities? And how do we solve that? So access and potential to increase social economic inequalities, I've already talked about a little bit. When we talk about usage of this, our adoption of these tools, we see sort of the same obstacles. If you don't have electricity, if you don't have access to a smartphone, if you don't have access to a laptop, then you're not using AI tools, you're not leveraging AI tools, and that means you're not benefiting from them, right? So that means we are entrenching existing inequalities. If you don't have access to these tools, then what are the resources available to you for you to gain access? Is it the government's responsibility? Is it private institutions? How can we address these problems? So those are the obstacles. And then I'll just touch on this really quickly, because Professor Mugabe already gave such a great talk on this. In terms of the AI landscape, Professor Mugabe mentioned this, and I'll just reiterate this. Technology is far outpacing policy or legislation. So it's sort of, for lack of a better word, it's a bit of a wild, wild west right now. We do have alternate means for governing some of these technologies. So we have data protection acts that I believe about half of the countries in Africa have enacted. We have cybersecurity, cybercrime acts that we can also use to regulate some of these tools, but there's no laws specific to AI that have been enacted. And I think that is a source of concern, because AI technology operates in a different way than other technologies have in the past. So when nations were writing these data protection acts, did they have AI technologies in mind? Did they have the functionalities of these technologies in mind? And are these acts sufficient? Then the other thing we need to talk about is, how are we making laws? If we're making laws or policies around AI, are we taking a human rights-centered approach? Or are we maybe taking more of a capitalistic view lens? And what does that mean for the future? And then what about the ethical considerations? What about things like indigenous knowledge, right? So if indigenous knowledge is digitized and put into these data training sets, into these AI and used by these AI technologies, what does that mean for that knowledge, for those communities where that knowledge comes from? How can we ensure that they benefit from that knowledge, right? Can AI tools be used by things? Can AI tools, use things like indigenous knowledge? Because indigenous knowledge is rooted in a place. So if that is removed, then what does that really mean? These are all ethical considerations that we need to consider. What about people who don't want to be part of this datafication world that we live in? What happens to them? What about people who want to opt out of AI technological advancements or usage? What does that mean to them? How do we make sure that people really understand things like informed consent when we're talking about AI tools, especially when we have such large language barriers? What about data control and data autonomy? So these are all things that we really need to think about. So I think my time is up. Thank you so much. And again, thank you for including me in this wonderful event. And I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Angeline Wairegi. That was an extremely exciting presentation, very relevant, very contextualized to the African continent. I think it's 2 p.m. here in Ghana, 5 p.m. in East Africa, 4 p.m. in Southern Africa, and like that. So I would like to suggest that we spend 5 more minutes on Q&A. So if there are people that would like to ask questions, please do so, so that we can quickly round up within the next 5 minutes. The first person is Dr. Bello Bolanle. I think if you could ask your question, followed by Professor George Nasinyama. Thank you. In that order, please.
Hello.
Dr. Bello, I think if you could proceed, please.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Thank you. My name is Dr. Bello from University of Ilorin, Faculty of Education. My question is on this AI and its relevance to we in teaching profession. I'm in Faculty of Education. So I'm of the view that for AI in education is more of a problem than a solution, ma. That's my question, and I want explanation, ma. It looks more of a problem than a solution. Thank you, ma.
Okay, thank you very much. Professor George Nasinyama.
Thank you so much, and I want to appreciate Angeline for a very, very informative presentation and enlightenment. I'm Vice Chancellor of UNICAF University here in Uganda. The issue of financing of AI was raised even by Professor Mugabe, and most of the funding comes from externally, and therefore mining our data and using it probably with a lens of the funding agencies. may I know from Angeline whether we have any financial resources within Africa or agencies within Africa that are supporting the development of AI. Of course, the use of AU was mentioned by Professor Mugabe, but I was just interested to know whether there are other sources of funding that can be leveraged for AI development on African continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Can we have a third question? Then I'll ask Angeline to respond to those three questions. Yes, Professor Martin Domo Chineboa, if you could proceed, and then Angeline will answer those three questions.
Okay, Dr. Angeline, my question is a very, very simple one. Will we wake up one day and regret having AI and supporting the research in AI?
Okay, did you get all those three questions, Angeline?
Yes, I did.
Thank you.
So let me start with the first one, AI in teaching. I think ideally AI is just, or the best way to think of AI is as a tool, right? These are tools that we can use, but for us to use them effectively and use them beneficially, we need to put guardrails in place. So we can't blame the technology. This is just technology. It's like a very advanced calculator, very advanced. We just need to be able to make sure that the way we are using them makes sense for our current realities. But given that, things like ChatGPT will fundamentally alter the way we teach and what we are trying to teach, right? We have to talk about with things like ChatGPT, where you can just input a prompt and it spits out information. Whether it's accurate or not is a matter for other discussions. But with things that can actually generate text, that can compile data and give a solution, then what happens to our traditional learning outcomes? It can't be that we want someone to learn about the history of Kenya anymore because they can just go to ChatGPT and it'll tell them they're not learning anything. So we do need to think about the way we are teaching and what that means on a fundamental level moving forward, and that what that means in terms of learning outcomes and what that means in terms of assessments, and then how we can integrate AI technology into that. So I don't think there's a way to stop the integration of AI tools or like ChatGPT into the education system. We just need to know we need to figure out how to live with them, fortunately or unfortunately. I don't know, I'm hoping that answered the question. So problem or solution, I'm saying neither. It's just a tool. We need to figure out how to use it. So it's a solution. In terms of resources available for AI development, I think in local, you have small pockets of resources that are available, mainly from technological companies. So like I know here in Kenya, Safaricom, for example, is supporting AI startups, right? So I'm sure it's similar in other industries, but it's still largely financed either by big tech companies like Microsoft or Google or IBM. But that's sort of what we have available. I have not, and I could be wrong, but I have not heard of an instance where government bodies are really jumping in and saying we will pay for XYZ to be developed and we will fund this research and, like fund the piloting and the scale up of this tools. I really haven't had that. So right now, the biggest available pots of money are from international bodies like big tech companies, from NGOs, and then on a smaller scale from private technological companies within a country. And then AI regrets, well, I think that train has left the station. I'm not sure we can do much about AI at this point. We can't stop the train. So we just need to figure out how we can leverage it. So one, Africa is not just a passive player, like we've been with a lot of revolution, sorry. So we don't want to be passive players. We want to be involved in the global discourse around AI. We want to be involved in development of these tools. We want to, one, make and set the agenda for ourselves. I think the real concern is that we are sort of following behind what the West or what big tech says, and we're not really thinking about the needs that we have and the impact that it could have for us, because we don't have the leverage to make that argument. So we really need to make sure that we have a seat at this table and we're pushing our agenda and making sure that our voice is being heard. I mean, we might regret AI, I don't know. 30 years from now, maybe the robots have taken over and we're like, this is a really bad idea. But for now, we need to make sure that we are leveraging it to the best of our ability and to our benefit.
Okay, thank you very much. I think there are no more questions. I would like Professor Olushola Oyewole to close us, and I would like to thank you very much, Dr. Angeline Wairegi. It was an excellent presentation. I think we had very, very good speakers today, and this Vice Chancellor's Forum benefited immensely. I see hands from Professor George Nasinyama and Dr. Bello. I don't know if they are new hands or you are in agreement with me. Okay, they are just clapping to show their appreciation. Thank you. May I hand over to you, Professor Oyewole? Thank you.
Yes. On behalf of the Association of African Universities, it's really my pleasure to thank Professor John Wama Mugabe and Dr. Angeline Wairegi for very informative sessions that we've had with them today. Really, I can see people asking questions how they can develop their own AI policy. I think it's time that institutions in Africa develop their own AI policy to guide the utilization of this new technology. Just as Ajni said, the train has already taken off. Africans cannot afford to be left behind. Let us get connected and be part of this great move. I want to thank all our participants, and I look forward to greater conversation on this issue of artificial intelligence. Thank you very much.
Before we go, if people could switch on their cameras and we can take a picture for this session. Yeah, so currently I'm on page 1. So if you could please, yeah, I'm done with page 1. And then I'm going to page 2. If my colleagues could also assist me, because I think we have quite a number of pages. I'm on page, finishing page 2. I'm now going to page 3. Yeah, it's a bit okay. I'm on page 3. I'm done with page 3. So page 4. Yeah. I'm done with page 4. Please bear with me. I'm on page 5, 2 more pages to go. Yeah. Please do open your cameras. I see some people's cameras are not open, but it would be nice to have a picture of all of us.
Probably before you go to page 7, let me appreciate our friend from Ascon in Colombia for being part of this. We appreciate you.
Okay, thank you, Prof. So now I'm going to the last page. If you could just hang on. Going to the last page now, yeah. There was quite a lot of us, so it took a while. So thank you very much, colleagues. So tomorrow we have another session. We are looking at case studies of AI adoption by universities. So we'll be talking to some 4 or 5 universities so they tell us what they are doing. This session starts at 10 a.m. GMT. So please keep connecting. There's a lot to learn this week. Bye-bye.